Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast Life Looks Different Now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we started season 3, and we read Genesis chapter 36, learning of Esau's descendants, Esau being Jacob's twin brother. We learn of his genealogy, his people, and we learned that Esau was the father of the Edomites in the land of Seir. We also learned that his descendants became lords and kings over that land. Now, to continue on the third season of this podcast, we are going to read Genesis chapter 37 about Jacob and his descendants, particularly Jacob's son, Joseph, and his dreams. Let's see what Genesis chapter 37 has in store for us. Let's see what we can learn from the chapter. Now, before I go ahead to reading the chapter, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Help the channel to grow. As you and I are learning the Word of God, others want to do the same. Give them the opportunity to do that by clicking the like button and share the channel with others and invite other people to come and read along with us. Thank you so much in advance for your support. Now let's get on to reading Genesis chapter 37. Joseph's dream. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and he came to Shechem. And the men found him wandering in the fields. And the men asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the men said, "They have gone away, for I have heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come on now, let us kill him and throw him into one of those pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit where in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Wow. In Genesis chapter 37, we can see that the saga continues. We can see that the family division, the family brokenness, the hurt is still destroying the family of Jacob, who is now called Israel. The chapter opens with reintroducing us to Joseph, Jacob's favorite son. And we see here that Joseph is only 17 years old. We learned that Joseph's brothers hated him because Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. Now we have to remember that the previous chapters, even when we go back to season 2, at the end of season 2, we learned that Jacob was the oldest son, the first son of Rachel. Rachel was the beloved wife of Jacob. So naturally, Jacob is going to be madly in love with this child. Naturally, Jacob, will be favoring this child. And it's pretty obvious. Jacob did not hide his affection towards his son Joseph. And it's pretty clear that the text is letting us know that Jacob favored Joseph because Joseph was the child of his old age, because Joseph was the son of his beloved wife, Rachel. And which is to no surprise to us, Israel, who is Jacob, decided to differentiate, between all of his sons by giving Joseph a princely multicolored robe. So it's hard enough to know that, like the other brothers, it's hard enough for them to know that their father favored, their other half brother. But it's even harder to witness it, to see how their father treated Joseph and how their father treated them. Their father went, out of his way to make a special coat, a multicolored coat for Joseph. And that gift could have very well been an indication of, Jacob's plan to make Joseph his primary heir. Joseph, the person who's going to carry out the covenant that God had given to Jacob's grandfather, Abraham. So it was pretty obvious that, Jacob is making it known that Joseph is the chosen one. And to make things worse, we learned that Joseph was a tattletale. So Joseph will go into the field and he will write report of how his brothers were misbehaving, all of their misdeeds, and he'll bring back the report to his father Jacob. So yes, that may have, even angered the brothers even more, because you could see that, you know, yes, you're already the favorite, everyone knows it. You already have the coat of multicolored, but now you being a tattletale, now you are reporting everything we do. So naturally they're going to be, angry and envious and really hate their brother Joseph. And then we learn that Joseph had two prophetic dreams. In the first dream, we learned that Joseph said he was in the field with his brothers and they were all binding sheaves. And in the dream, he saw that his sheaf stood up and then all of his brothers' sheaves bowed down to him. And we can see that his brothers were very upset about this prophetic dream, because they understood that it meant that Joseph was saying that he is going to be the leader of the whole family. He's going to be the one who is the primary heir. He's going to be the one that everyone has to bow down to, right? Because we have to remember, in that time, in that biblical time, it was always the oldest son, the firstborn son, who carries out the covenant, who end up having all the wealth, because it's the oldest son's responsibility to take care of the whole family. Not only his own family, but all of his relatives, his mother, his sisters, his other brothers. It was his responsibility to handle everything. And that firstborn son is also the one who gets the blessing, of their father when the father is passing. And we learned how Jacob stole, the blessing from his twin brother Esau. But now we're learning that his son Joseph is basically saying to all of his older brothers, you guys are going to be bowing down to me. I'm going to lead you. I'm going to be the one that everyone has to look up to. And of course, his brothers are very upset. And then he went on to have another dream, a second dream. Even though Joseph was aware that his brothers were envious and upset and they didn't want to hear what he had to say, he went on again to share with them that second dream that he had. And then in the second dream, he saw that the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were all, circling and all bowing down to him. And then we learned that his father rebuked him. His father said, are you saying that all of us, me, your mom, and your brothers will all be bowing down to you? What is that you're saying? What are you saying? And it's interesting because Jacob even mentioned Joseph's mother bowed down to him, but we already know that Joseph's mother is passed on. Maybe Jacob did pay attention to what Joseph was saying. He understood that it was prophetic. He understood that lo and behold, that indeed Joseph will be the one leading the family, because he took note of that. And he rebuked his son in a soft manner. It wasn't anything like he was angry about, we can see, because it's pretty obvious that he wasn't angry with his favorite son. But of course, being aware that the other brothers are listening, Jacob is trying to make sure that Joseph understands, you have to be careful of what you say, because your brothers can see that, they might be upset, and we don't want that. We don't want to inflame anything. We don't want to get anybody wild up. So let's just not keep on repeating these dreams. And then we learn that Joseph's 10 brothers were away pasturing the family flocks near Shechem. Ironically, this was the same place where Jacob's sons killed all the men in the city of Shechem, where their sister Dinah was raped. So it's interesting how these young men are now, like, Jacob's in a position where God has clearly protected him, protected his family, that now they can go out and near the city where they had killed almost every man in that city. They are pasturing near it. That's where they were sent to do to pasture the flocks. And then so we learned that Jacob called his son Joseph and ordered him to go to his brothers alone to get a report on how the flocks were doing and how his other sons were doing. So it's pretty clear that Jacob may have misunderstood how his other sons were feeling. He clearly couldn't read the room, if you ask me, because if you have differentiated this young man, you have given him a coat of multicolored, but it didn't occur to him that the other ones were angry. And then your son is having these prophetic dreams, and you understood that the other ones will be bowing down to him, and he didn't think that could make them angry, upset in any kind, upsetting them in any kind of way. I find that to be so bizarre, because he went on to send Joseph alone to get a report of how his brothers were doing and how the flocks were doing. That's quite dangerous. This is the second time here that I'm reading and realizing that Jacob really couldn't read the room, because because of his failure to protect his daughter Dinah, she was raped. At the end of season 2, we learned that his daughter was raped because because he just failed to protect his family. And now we are learning that he's sending his 17-year-old son Joseph away to go get a report on his brothers, who clearly cannot stand him. They hated the kid. But then we learned that Joseph obeyed his father's command and went off to find his brothers. But then when he got to near Shechem, he did not find them. But then a man told him that his brothers went to a whole different area, Dothan. And so Joseph, continued on to go to Dothan to find his brothers. And the next thing we learn is that as Joseph is approaching his brothers, the minute they saw him, they plotted to murder him. And we hear them say, "Oh, there goes that dreamer. Let's see what's going to happen to his dreams if he dies." Because they had no intention on being ruled by their younger brother. They're like, okay, let's see what's going to happen to that fancy dream of his if he's no more. But then we learned that his oldest brother, Reuben, heard the brothers discussing how they're going to kill Joseph, their own flesh and blood, their own brother. And to spare Joseph's life, Reuben basically gave them a whole different idea. He suggested, instead of killing him, instead of getting blood in their hands because he's their own flesh and blood, let's just put him in a pit. Let's find a pit and leave him there. And, surprisingly enough, they actually listened to Reuben. I can't help but wonder how Reuben managed to convince them to do that. But they listened to the oldest brother. So clearly Reuben must have had some power and some leadership or some level of respect, because they must have really respected his views, because if they didn't, they would not have listened. They would have carried on and do whatever they wanted with Joseph, but they didn't. They listened to the oldest brother. And once Joseph got close to them, they stripped him of his beautiful robe that his father had made for him. They stripped him. I'm sure they stripped him naked and left him there and put him in the pit with no water to die. Such a horrible, horrible way to die. But it was, Reuben's way of, because he had the idea that he'll go back later and retrieve Joseph from the pit, because he didn't want this kid to die. He figured, okay, I'm going to retrieve this kid from the pit and I'm going to bring him back to my dad. And maybe in some way, Reuben was thinking that could have actually helped him be redeemed in his father's eyes, because we have to remember Reuben was the son who went ahead and slept with his father's concubine and slept with one of his brother's mother. So maybe in some way he was trying to redeem himself and trying to get some favor from his father by returning Joseph, being, like Jacob's favorite son, back to him unharmed. But unfortunately for Reuben, he must have stepped away for a little while, because we learned that the brothers later on were sitting there eating, resting a little bit, and then apparently, with Reuben being absent, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites heading their way, and they decided, you know what, let's just sell him. One of the brothers, Judah, proposed to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites. And he figured, well, instead of killing him, he's flesh and blood. Let's just sell him. At least his blood won't be on our hands. That was his excuse. At least we can get some money out of this. That was his excuse. And all the brothers agreed. And they sold their brother for 20 shekels of silver. Wow. Their own flesh and blood. I'll tell you, there is nothing new under the sun. Many of us see things that are happening in the world, happening in the culture, and we have this idea that this is new, this is something. No, I can assure you, there is nothing new under the sun. We can see here that, just last night I was having game night in my home, and a group of us were discussing, how slavery came about, how many of our ancestors were taking from, the beautiful continent of Africa, from all these many different countries, from Sierra Leone. Me being Haitian, I know Haitians, our ancestors were mostly taken from Côte d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, the Congo, even Nigeria. And our ancestors were brought to the island, to work the island. We were put in shackles and slaves, and many of our ancestors were sold by our own. So we can see here, this is nothing new. Joseph was sold by his own flesh and blood. I cannot even imagine how devastated this young man must have been, to stand there to watch his own flesh and blood, his own brothers who are older than him, who were supposed to be protecting him, taking care of him, to strip him naked, dump him in a pit to die, and then retrieve him from the pit to actually sell him into slavery. And that is exactly what they did. That is exactly what they did. They decided to sell their own. And unfortunately for Reuben, he was not there. He couldn't do anything. He came back a short while later to find that the pit was empty. And he looked around asking, where's the boy? Where did he go? He discovered that Joseph had been sold. Joseph was gone. And he was heartbroken because he was the oldest. He was the one who would have been responsible. He was the one who would have had to give a report to his father, letting his father know what had, happened. And now that these brothers had already sold their younger brother Joseph, they conjure up this plan. Now they had to fully sell the lie to their father that Joseph was dead. They fabricated evidence. They went out of their way to kill a goat and smeared the blood of the goat on Joseph's beautiful multicolored robe that his father had made for him. And then they had the nerve to return home and presented the bloody robe to their father. Such a cruel, cruel thing to do. It goes to show you that when people are doing evil things, they don't care who they do it to. Yes, their father had his own shortcomings. Yes, their father was not perfect, but he was still their father and he took care of them. Right? And to think that they had no problem whatsoever being so cruel by bringing this robe, full of blood to their father and presented it to their father and asked him to identify the robe and confirm that that robe belonged to his beloved son Joseph. I cannot even imagine like how hard somebody's heart, our heart has to be to do such a thing to our own. But these brothers had no remorse. They didn't care. They didn't care. They presented it to their father, and Jacob reached the exact conclusion they were hoping for. They were hoping that their father would think that a wild beast, a wild animal, ripped his son to shred, to pieces, and only the coat was left behind. And lo and behold, that is exactly the conclusion that Jacob came to when he saw the robe full of blood and ripped. And Jacob put on a sackcloth and mourned his son for days. His sons couldn't comfort him. Not that they cared, because if they wanted to comfort him, they could have told their father the truth. They could have just simply said, yeah, we sold him to the Egyptians. They could have, but they didn't do that. So they didn't care. But the text said they attempted to comfort him. They did not care. His daughters attempted to comfort him as well, with no success. Jacob wanted to die with his son. He wanted to be buried. He wanted to be gone, just like his son was gone. I cannot imagine the amount of pain that man went through. You see, when we live our lives in deceitfulness, and we get deceived ourselves, and Jacob, when Jacob got the covenant, that's for sure, he got the blessing, but he paid the consequences of his behavior, of his deceitfulness. And we can see that his sons got his deceitful nature. And now they're deceiving him in that way. And now they are, they got rid of their own. And poor Jacob is mourning that. I cannot even imagine as a parent having to go through that. Thinking that your child has been torn to pieces, ripped apart, and eaten by a wild beast. Jacob refused to be comforted. And then we learned that the chapter ended with Joseph being sold in Egypt to Potiphar, who is an officer of Pharaoh, and he's the captain. He's captain of the guard. That's where the chapter ended. There are so many lessons to learn in this chapter. I think the first thing that I learned from this, after reading this chapter a few times, I knew the story even when I was a child, because my father, always read these stories to us. And even when, as a child, I've always thought to myself, see, that is exactly why when you have dreams and you have, certain purpose, certain blessings, certain things that God may put into your heart, it is best to keep it to yourself. You don't have to share all your dreams with everyone. Not everyone has your best interest at heart. Even in your own family members, there are people it could be your own parents who are jealous of you or envious of you, who do not want you to succeed. That is a thing. But we can see that Joseph did not have this power of discernment. He didn't know any better. He was young. He was 17 years old. And he figured, oh, these are my brothers and sisters. And, these are my family. I can share these dreams with them. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So you and I have to be mindful of who we share our dreams, our aspirations, our blessing with. Sometimes it's best to keep it to yourself. Sometimes it is best to keep it to yourself. And I also learned that, when we play favoritism with our children and we make it so boldly obvious, that's what Jacob did. You are opening people up to be envious of your loved ones. Me as a parent, I would never even dream of, openly show favoritism to either one of my children, because I don't want either one of them to become envious of the other one or jealous of the other. I want them to know that they are family. As I'm teaching them, I tell my children every day that they are the only two people who know what my heartbeat sounds like from the inside. So therefore, they owe each other a responsibility to take care of one another. I'm not always going to be present. I'm not always going to be around. There's going to be a time when I'll be gone and they'll still be here. So they have to love each other. So I foster that love, within them, so they could always know that they have each other. They have to rely on one another. I'm not going to go out of my way to show favoritism to either one of my children, because it would never benefit them, and it's unfortunate that Jacob did that, and Joseph suffered the consequences of that. And I also learned that from reading this chapter, that when people are envious of you, they are capable of anything. You know what I mean? Like, they are capable of the worst imaginable thing. So we have to be very, very careful. We have to be very, very careful. These brothers had no problem stripping their younger brother naked and dump him in a pit. They had no issue with selling their own. It goes to show, when people are envious of you, they are jealous of you, they are capable of anything. So we have to be very, very careful. But what I do like about the chapter is how Reuben tried the best he could. He was planning on rescuing Joseph and tried to redeem himself. I like that. It goes to show that even when you are jealous of someone, oftentimes we can still be capable of doing something good for them. He may not like the fact that his position was being threatened, because him being the oldest, he should be the one carrying out the covenant. But he understood that the way things were going, Joseph would have been the one. But yet that did not stop him from trying to retrieve his brother and saving him and bringing him back to his father. I like that. I really appreciate seeing that. It goes to show that even when something may not benefit us, sometimes there might still be a part of us who feel the need to do what is right. And it's pretty clear that this is what Reuben was trying to do. But nevertheless, you and I, as we are reading these chapters, we have to take notes. We have to learn to move in silence. Not everything that is happening in your life need to be posted on social media, need to be echoed everywhere, need to be shared with everybody. So be very selective as to who you share your deepest heart desires with, your great dreams with, because these people can make or break you. But then, of course, we're going to learn what happened to Joseph next week when we read Genesis chapter 38, because sometimes what people meant for bad, God means it for good. So there's that. Thank you again for tuning in this week, for reading this chapter with me, for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am praying for you this week, And I pray that you're going to have a marvelous, productive week. Until next time, darlings, bisous.